right. Well, it is now, according to my clock, 11:01. So I would like to welcome everybody to the March edition of our Maker Roundtable. And, thank everybody for joining us. And we have had a request for some floor time. Ken, this is where you wanted to talk about stuff, right?
Yeah.
So first I will say, if anybody has any burning questions or comments that they want to share right now, we can do that. Or we can kind of just jump. Oh, all right, Jessica, you have a burning blue and purple something. What have you got?
It's for World Down Syndrome Day. I made some rock your socks switches.
I love that. Great design.
Very
fun.
cool.
How long did it take to make?
Like 3 hours. I've never really done it where I had to literally put in 3 different colors of tape.
Mhm.
So I was getting pissed off, and I usually get a design off the internet, like a clip art, and then I'll just trace it onto the cardboard and duct tape
Gotcha.
before I cut it. But I had to use like an X-Acto knife to get all the lines straight, and it was a lot of work.
Well, good for you. Expanding your skill set now
Mm-hmm.
to fancy design.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. All right. Oh. All right. So Rebecca put something in the chat. She said, anyone have good links for laser cutting key guards? and our key guard guru is shaking his head. So Ken, why don't you go ahead and
yeah, I'll just add quick plug. So been doing 3D printed key guards for a long time, and I'm a key guard designer. With the help of Christine Bowden, have expanded that to doing ready to print designs. And what I did in association with that is I contacted the guy who's in charge of KeyGuard AT. He does laser cut. He also does 3D printed key guards now. But he does laser cut key guards, and asked him if it'd be possible to create an offer on his website or on his site for people who gave him a Heather. Oh, sorry, somebody's trying to jump in there.
Heather McNally, you are having some background noise come in, it sounds like.
Sorry.
And you're on twice, so I don't know if you have two different. There you go. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. All right, so I asked him if he would create an offer, a special offer for people who gave him the design in a format he could just easily laser cut. And my keyguard designer is more than capable of generating the design in a format that can be laser cut. So you can either use my designer to create a design that is laser cuttable and send it to KeyGuard AT and have them cut it, or you can even use one of the pre-made designs, but they're only for a specific set of iPads in a specific set of cases for a specific set of apps. But yeah, so I just want to let you know that there is a special offer. I think he charges like $45 to print, and he makes no distinction. I love this part. He makes no distinction about the size of the key guard. So I've actually used my program to design key guards for keyboards. So an entire keyboard, and had it laser cut, and he still charges the same amount for it. So it's fundamentally a huge piece of acrylic that would be hard for a lot of people to do. It would be very difficult to create a 3D printed version of a keyguard for this. It's just too big. But a laser cut version, not bad at all. It's just a wonderful price. Anyway, just wanted to get that out there as an option.
Scott, I think you're muted.
I don't usually mute, but I'm trying to be polite. Out of curiosity, for something like a keyboard, couldn't you do that in two parts and have it kind of snap together?
You could, it's just difficult. It's difficult. You can see this. It's difficult to cut something in half that is so irregular. So there's no vertical line through this.
Right.
It's a jagged thing. So to cut that in half, and also the space
Right.
on the middle of this, it's a very narrow jagged line. So joining it again later would be a challenge.
Okay, makes sense.
Oh, I tell you, I've got one up here somewhere. Yeah, let me just grab it real quick. So this is all laser cut by keyguard AT for 45 bucks.
Wow. And it's 45 across the board, you said.
Yeah, 45 across the board. He didn't ask how big it is. He just says, give me the SVG file.
All right. Very cool. Well, Rebecca, I think that was you, and I hope that helps. And then, as Shannon is saying, some libraries will do, some libraries you can do that. Wow. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or anything off the top? All right. Ken, I didn't look back at my email. What was it that what topic was it that you were interested in discussing?
Yeah, so I contacted Scout a week or two ago, which of course is way longer than his short-term memory. So I understand. But I pick on Scout often. I'm sure, I know he doesn't take it personally.
It makes me cry myself to sleep at night, Ken.
I'm sorry. I said that I'm putting together a presentation that isn't ready yet. It's got a long way to go. And I feel a little bit like a stand-up comedian who basically goes out night after night after night to different clubs and tries to refine his routine. And so I've already made this presentation twice now. The first time was almost a disaster. The second time was a little bit better. I did that with Cole and Shannon's group. Because I learned things from the first presentation that I could include. So this is a presentation, because it does involve slides, of where I see AAC going in a new world of new, groundbreaking, revolutionizing technology that we've all heard of and is coming after us very quickly, called generative artificial intelligence, or ChatGPT is the most common way it's talked about. So how can you use generative artificial intelligence to basically restart alternative and augmented communication? And so that's what I would like to go through and just get people's feedback about what they think about the concept, where they think things just don't make sense. So that was what I wanted to do. Scout said, make sure it's good. And I said, no, I can't guarantee that, but I'll try to make it funny. And I probably won't do that much either. So that's what I wanted to take some time doing is getting your feedback on where this thing needs to be beefed up.
All right, get going. Let's hear it.
Oh, ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. So let me go ahead and share. And you know what I don't see on this screen? Dang. What I don't see on, oh, there it is. Just a new interface. They've changed it. I want to make sure I shared my sound. this. Goodness gracious. Okay. Slideshow, start from beginning. All right. So you're seeing my blank white screen right now, right? All right, then here we go. So I want to talk about the state of the art in AAC right now. And so I have a couple of proposals of what that may be. It's what I think is out there. You can have a virtual keyboard, or you can have a grid of pictures. And that is the state of the art. And crazily enough, has been the state of the art for multiple decades. And I wonder, is that really what needs, where the state of the art should be in AAC? So here's a virtual keyboard. I describe it as you're building your thoughts one character at a time, and you may get some shortcuts because there may be some word prediction that's taking place. You have access to an unlimited vocabulary because you have access to all of the characters on that keyboard. And your level of grammar is really dependent on your literacy as a user. So you have full access to the language. There's a time cost in gaining that full access because you're having to produce each word one character at a time. The grid, in that sense, you're building your thoughts one word at a time, largely. And you're limited in your vocabulary to what's programmed on the device. And sometimes getting access to a more full vocabulary means you have to access that through a hierarchy of pages, which can have lots of cognitive requirements. It's difficult to put together proper sentence syntax and semantics with proper grammar, simply because of the user interface here doesn't give you access to all the fine details of language. I was curious to know what the academics are working on these days. And here are a couple of references. First of all, this exercise, asterisks, is a effort in the EU, sponsored by the city of Vienna and a university in Austria. In the United States, Project Open is the hot thing. Well, it was hot a year ago when I was year and a half ago when I was at ATIA, and they were presenting on it. It's got some big names associated with it. They're really trying to open up the design environment for AAC devices so that they can get more people participating. But it's also, much like Asterisk Grid, it is also a grid-based effort, this project. They're trying to improve the speed of use of a grid. When people are involved in conversation, and I'm talking here about interaction between two individuals, rather than I'm going to prepare a document or an email that I'm going to send out. But in conversation, there are two different kinds of goals that you can have. And here's the reference for where this was all. Actually, it predates even this article, but you can be involved in transactional or ideational kinds of conversations. Those can be your goals, and the goals there are, it's important to the accomplishment of the external goal that the exchanged information is very accurate and that is transmitted without any is accurate, and that is, I don't know what the heck that is. Anyway, that almost seems contrary, so I got to fix that. But the delay is not particularly important here. What's really important is that you get accurate information exchanged. I want a hamburger rather than I just want something to eat. Or I want, yeah. I want some fast food. No, you want to be able to say exactly what you want, and the amount of time it takes to communicate that is not as critical as the exact transfer of information. Interactional or interpersonal, in this case, you're looking at social interactions and creating favorable impressions with other people. And the precision of the message is less important than how quickly you're able to get your statement out. So I think grids and virtual keyboards are sufficient at meeting goals of type 1, where it's really important that I tell you exactly what I mean. And it's not so important how long it takes me to put that message together. But when you're talking about interactions with other individuals in a real-time sense and interpersonal relationships, that exactness isn't as important as how quickly you're getting your message out there. So how do various interfaces perform? So in typical speech and conversation, people speak at around 100 to 180 words per minute. Grid-based apps, especially those with row column scanning, which is pretty common, 10 to 20 words per minute. A virtual keyboard using the same access technique, less than 5 words a minute. And remember, the difference between these two is I have access to the entire language. Here, I have access to what's programmed into my AAC device, and it may not put together great phrases and sentences. How do they perform at another level? I think this is really a key piece to real-time interpersonal communication, and it is the period of silence. So in typical speech, there's less than 2 seconds of silence in a conversation. Any more than that, and people get real anxious. And they feel they have to fill that time. And if that means completing your thought or interrupting you or whatever, they will do it because they can't help themselves. It's just too uncomfortable to have more than 2 seconds. And in fact, it's actually, in most conversations, less than a second. With grid-based apps, you've got over 30 seconds typically, well over these numbers typically, and with virtual keyboards, twice that, to get your thought out. So imagine people being uncomfortable with 2 seconds of silence and you're giving them greater than 30 or greater than a minute. So where do you find these kinds of devices used? Well, often with dedicated communication partners, people whose job it is to spend time with you and communicate with you and advocate for you if necessary. Those kinds of conversations are largely transaction-based, where again, it's important to get out that specific piece of information accurately. If you're going to communicate with strangers, often it's you've prepared your presentation in advance, and all you need to do is start it running. But what is the prevalent mode of communication in society? Well, we don't have dedicated communication partners typically. We're not preparing speeches typically. We're often communicating with strangers or simply acquaintances. Those are real time, either face-to-face, phone-to-phone, some sort of give and take exchange. And like I said in the previous slide, these kinds of conversations are extremely averse to awkward silence. So what would a high throughput AAC device look like? And here I describe that as building thoughts, one thought at a time, not a word at a time, not a character at a time, but an entire thought at a time. This is an example of what the device's user interface might look like. There might be information about where this conversation is taking place, what your communication partner is saying is represented, whether that communication partner is known or unknown, whether it's a stranger or an acquaintance, and We can talk about how all these things would actually be gathered, these pieces of information. Then for everything that is, each thing that is said, there would be some number, in this case 3, of reasonable optional responses to that, with an option to request other potential responses. And always an option to fall back to whatever your other primary communication interface would be, whether it's a grid or a virtual keyboard. So rather than searching through a list of buttons or typing out a response, one character or one word at a time, you click or tap one time and your entire response is provided. So where would these reasonable responses come from? We can already imagine where things like, oh, where am I? Where that information would come from. Or what did that person just say? Where would that come from? But where would these reasonable responses come from? Well, for those people who haven't interacted with ChatGPT, this is what the user interface looks like. You provide some bit of background context and a question or please continue, a request to please continue something. And ChatGPT then does what you ask or continues what you were saying. It can do that very, very, very quickly. The time it takes to press the return or enter or go or whatever button it is here to the production of, where is my mouse? The production of this information, generally around a second. What you have down here is fundamentally an unlimited and potentially custom vocabulary. When you interact with ChatGPT, the large language model sitting behind ChatGPT is based on pretty much the language of the web, the language of literature, everything that's already out there, largely in English, but not necessarily all in English. But you can customize a large language model. You can train it to use or to be influenced in a different direction or something that's more like what you have written in the past, what you have said in the past. So entire thoughts are generated in real time, and they're appropriate to whatever context you provide. The grammar is very nice, often better than a lot of people can generate on their own. Because the large language model has learned a lot about grammar, a lot about syntax, a lot about the language just by seeing tons of it. So here's just an example that where some context has been provided about the location and the players involved in the conversation and what the communication partner has just said, and then said, please suggest 3 possible brief responses for this AAC user to say. And here's what it spits out in response. It's 3 possible. This could have been, give me 25 possible responses. It's not limited to 3. Here's the potential architecture for this approach. So this particular architecture puts everything, all the functionality on the AAC device. And this whole thing is described, this process is described in an article that will be published in the next 2 weeks, I've been assured, in the Assistive Technology Outcomes and Benefits Journal that's associated with ATIA. But this is one of the architectures that I described in that article, where everything sits on the device. It takes advantage of natural language processing functionality that all exists in the world to see audio, voice audio, and translate it into text, and then to take text and translate it into voice audio. Situational awareness concepts like, where am I physically located? What was I planning to do at this point in time? Who am I involved in communication with using either voice or facial recognition. That information is fed into a box here that is looking at how to provide context for requesting a response. First of all, information about my personal worldview. And again, a lot of this could be trained into the large language model long before it was ever referenced here. Information about my relationship with this particular individual, if it is a known individual with whom I have history, with whom I have goals for conversation. Any conversational history we may have, plus what this person may be asking me now or has asked me in the past. That information is then sent across to the response generation piece. This is your traditional large language model right here. And you provided that context and you ask it for responses. It provides you some responses that you as the AC user interact with right now and choose among, or you just abandon entirely and create your own response. Whatever the result of that is, the natural language processing spits out a proper, all the sentence structure here has already been provided, but you've got language, voice inflection, gender, age, all that kind of stuff is built into the ability to produce voice. These two arrows here are kind of critical. What they do is, this is an interaction that you have as an AEC user offline with the system. This is where you fine tune the model. This is where you review what it has done to date, usually over the last 24 hours, how it suggested responses to you. You're basically saying, I didn't like what you suggested there. I didn't like your first response. I kind of liked your second response, and here's why. Because the system is always designed, one of its goals is to make itself a better advocate of what you would want to say in this situation. And if you're not choosing the first thing it provided to you, which would be the easiest to access via the interface, it wants to enhance its own processing. It wants to make sure that whatever it suggested it's the kind of way you view the world, not the way that the internet views the world. And if you're meeting someone new or you've learned something new about someone during the conversation, it wants to enhance that model of relationship that it is maintaining as well. These interactions are taking place offline. They're not part of your normal interaction day. So they're completely under the control of the user as far as when they take place, what the length of this interaction is, and the speed at which it takes place. This is a very patient communication partner, an infinitely patient communication partner. And it could include things like, well, let me pretend to have that conversation with you now, and let's refine how we might have this interaction with some potential communication partner right now, and accomplish two things. You get a chance to kind of refine your conversational skills, and the system gets a chance to refine the way it would respond to prompts. So I want to show you a demo of what this would look like. And this is the user interface. User interface is a totally separate concept from the underlying functionality. So this is one possible user interface. Better designers than me, could easily come up with things that are laid out better, more efficient, more effective, more useful to individuals. And it would also be something that the end user would customize to their own personal needs and desires. So this is a totally fake demo. It's just the user interface with some hard-coded stuff going on behind it. Its purpose in life is to just give you a feel for how this might might behave. Not that this is proof. This isn't a proof of concept. It's a concept. So this is a conversation that's going to take place at a Starbucks. So you're going to see the individual enter. Well, the individual will bring up the user interface, and they'll choose some settings, and I'm not going to modify any of the settings here. They enter a Starbucks, and the location is going to be recognized based on GPS. So then you'll see nothing here, and then all of a sudden it'll say Starbucks. The person is going to go to the counter, and you'll hear nothing, and then all of a sudden you'll hear some words that are spoken by the Starbucks employee, and they will be shown here in text. The system is going to theoretically say, do I know this person, based on either voice recognition or facial recognition? And if you're already imagining AR glasses that could tell where you're looking and use that information to select the face and say, do I know this person? Yes, that's technology, again, that is not brand new. That technology is already out there. So then it's going to use this information here. Where am I? What was just said by whom? And it's going to use that as context for trying to propose some responses. And so these boxes will fill in with 3 possible responses. The assumption here is this is a vertically scanned interface. It's switch activated. And so I'm just going to click on a pretend switch down here when the item is highlighted that I want to respond with. While the user is choosing, and this could be something they do by reading what's there, or it could be auditory prompting. While they're choosing, maybe they're even asking for more suggestions. There has to be something that is holding their place in the conversation, and I just term those placeholder comments. If I were an expert in communication analysis, there are names for these things. I'm sure it's not placeholder comments. But the idea is the machine is going to say some things that just they're not nonsense, but they're known in the language in conversational speech to say, hey, hang on, I'm not ready yet to respond, but I'm gonna respond. So don't jump in and say it again or try to reword what you said. Just hang on, I'm almost there. So the system is going to just generate those for me until I choose something, and it's going to speak whatever I chose. And then you have to imagine that the conversation goes on from there. You can, this is, like I say, is totally fake, and there's a link here that I'm going to click on, but it's just this address right here. You can try this yourself. It's right there out on the web if you'd like to give it a shot. So here we go. Get over here. Mouse, please. You guys see this? Okay. So I'm not going to change any of these right now, but you could customize it. You can customize it on the if you go to the site. So I'm going to start this scenario. Nothing in location. I recognize them at Starbucks. Walk to the counter.
Welcome to Starbucks. What would you like to drink?
That's converted into text. System says, I don't know this person. So I'm going to go ahead and now generate.
You know?
Now you're hearing the placeholder comments.
I think.
Okay, not very creative, but those are the placeholder comments. And they'll just continue to cycle. I think I came up with like 10 of them.
Interesting question.
So I'm going to eventually choose what I want here, and it's just going to be one of these guys here.
Hi, give me a venti iced chai tea latte with 3 chai pumps.
All right. The idea is the conversation would continue from there. So the person would say, oh, that sounds great. Thank you. What's your name? The system knows your name. These are all information about you that it's gathered. I don't have to type it out. So I have started a new version of this, a second version, which would say, okay, where does the conversation go from here? What happens if somebody says something that is kind of unintelligible? What would the system do? By the way, I quickly ran into the limitations of my coding abilities. So the next thought occurs to me, I'm just going to bring it up here. How does the LLM handle uncertainty? Does garbage in result in garbage out? That's an old programming concept. But so I thought, well, let me try it. Let me give ChatGPT some garbage. So I took the same basic prompt and said, instead of saying, would you like something else with that? I said, thank you. Would you lack anything else with TAC? And then said, okay, what are you going to do with that, ChatGPT? And it responded, it seems there's a minor typo in this response, assuming they meant, thank you, would you like anything else with that? Which, of course, was what they said. There are 3 possible responses. And yeah, it was amazing to me that ChatGPT was able to recognize the problem, account for it, and still go through with the exercise. That is amazing to me, having been in the software world for a while. So I said, I got to work harder. Let me work a little harder. Let me definitely say, let's make this really hard. Thank you, would to bike anything otra mitas. Please provide 3 responses. Then I thought, I think I've heard that language before in the world. Let me. Oh yeah, I know who talks like that.
Boom together, then crash into bus liver, then vanished.
Okay, so that's Jar Jar Binks. We've all heard of him speak before. He would actually understand that and come back. And I thought, okay, give me a chance here. What was Jar Jar Binks say to you? And it said, oh, I see Starbucks employees appears to be playful or jumbled mix of words and possibly languages. If you want to play along, here are some options. Okay, which is kind of interesting. It brings up a whole new concept here. Maybe you should be able to do joke responses as part of this interface, play along responses. Sometimes these kinds of thoughts don't even occur to you until you've actually tried something, get it out there and have people interact with it and say, oh, that's interesting. I could go this way with that too. So common response to this whole story is, aren't you taking away the user's voice? And I think only to a degree, and to a degree that is probably acceptable to users, but we got to get that feedback, got to get that evaluation. So to reiterate, that LLM, before it's even part of your system, has already been trained as much as possible about who you are and what you are like. And that can include any written material you have, who your family and acquaintances are, you can take personality surveys, tests, whatever, what your favorite books, movies, etc. These kinds of things can help build what your worldview is. It's regularly updated offline, where you give it that kind of training, that ongoing training. The user is going to select among the offered responses, and they can always request more. Finally, the user can always fall back to an alternative interface where they have complete freedom, at least as much freedom as programmed into the device, to produce a response. And anytime you select anything from that, anytime you choose an option that is not the very first one suggested by the LLM, that is heads up to the LLM that it needs to change, that it needs to work harder to represent the kind of things you would want to say. So I was thinking about, is this really where AAC is headed? And I really do think it is in the short term where it's headed. It's not in the long term. So the real revolution won't be to speak as me. It's going to be, let me speak for myself, okay? but let me do it in a method that is using a method that is real time. And I think this is where that's going. So brain computer interfaces. And because we thought that things like human language surrogates, machines, was going to be 50 years away, and it turned out to be a year ago, this is also going to be sooner than we think. I still think it's probably 20 years away, but boy, am I a fool. So there are multiple companies working on this kind of thing right now. So you've got Neuralink, and then I learned about a couple of these other guys from an article about Neuralink. But this has all the hype because it's Elon. All right, so that is the entire story here. Now I'm just interested in getting your feedback. Let me stop sharing. All right, so I'd be interested in hearing what kind of objections you have, where things graded with you. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. So as I listen to this, our students are going to be very literate. Like they're going to have to be able to read
That's
or
what
have
I've been telling you.
good audio. You know, they're going to have to be able to understand stuff, because for like our elementary kids who are still learning, and a lot of our severe and profound kids who use their AAC devices, they are not literate because we're not doing a great job of teaching literacy to those kids.
Okay.
So our push is going to have to be in elementary that we're doing a better job of teaching kids to be literate so that they can use something like this.
Okay, and let me jump in just for a second to say, the one other thing that folks that are technology like ChatGPT are really good at is producing output and input, because that choice, that list of possible responses, that could have been further contextualized by saying, provide a response that a 6-year-old would say.
So they would still have to read that response.
Or they hear the response, but they hear the response that would be spoken in language a 6-year-old would understand.
But they still have to understand it. And we still have some kids who read raw, but don't understand the audio. Like we run into that a lot. Like if I write it, they get it, but they don't understand it audibly. And then I've got my kids who, some of them understand audio, but it's too fast for them to process. And when they have to go back and re-listen to the whole conversation, they still don't pick up the pieces that they need.
Right, right. Again, I think that the technologies are probably already there to do things like slow down speech, like represent. I think I mentioned this to Shannon in our tamales talk, that if I can translate from English to Russian using ChatGPT, can I translate from English to PCS symbols?
Mm-hmm.
So if
that would be amazing.
Language is limited to graphic pictures.
And I do think a lot of those kids we do give them a lot of choices, even verbally, just very simple ones, just a couple of words. And so again, like, yeah, if you were to bring that down, very simple language, I think that it could be a possibility, and including, auditory scanning, I guess, kind of for those options for our kids who don't have literacy. But where I see this being like an amazing tool, again, thinking about adults, with aphasia or ALS and things like that, who maybe have some, literacy skills, or can go through at least, might be able to understand what they're hearing. So absolutely for adults, I think this is amazing. It'd be really cool.
I think you
agree.
need,
I love the concept.
I think you need to keep in mind that there's a lot of tools out there. You still have to go through that process of either the HAT model or the SET framework of determining the tool based on the individual and their needs. And so I foresee with the technology growing that you could almost have some literacy tools built into the communication, like a typical child who learns through their errors on how to reformulate. And I think some of the algorithms could actually help an individual develop some of that communication. But I think at this point, you're simplifying what communication is entirely. So think about your option of the cognitive level of your individual. There's a lot of cognitive processing going into what you're describing. Not that we can't have those expectations that our kids can move in that direction. So we still would have to look at the access method in regards to how they access the device. How are they going to be a switch user? Are they going to be an eye gaze user? And then I'm sure the settings would be able to account for that to speed up even those interactions. And so that would be really cool. You still need to have that level of literacy. And so for these, as you said, those really complex communicators, there could be an earbud where it's giving them very simplified choices. But if they're at a one-word level, you still need to understand, are they trying to make a request? What is the function of that communication? And then even going into like your coffee shop. So what if I have a job where I'm an interior designer, but I use augmentative communication, and maybe I'm going into the coffee shop to help them develop a new design for or a new layout for their coffee shop. So how is it going to help me change the function that I'm not going into that coffee shop to just order coffee, but I have another whole purpose of going into that coffee shop, which that then once again would be maybe job related, where my job is an interior design. So it would have an algorithm for I'm going in for work versus I'm going in for, so there must be some way to kind of choose your function of going into that place paired with that. And would that be tied into the algorithm? I don't know.
So Shannon, in the article, I talk about ideas like that. And one of the sort of most simplistic concepts would be, you have a calendar that says 9 o'clock, you have an appointment with Jane Doe at Starbucks to talk about interior design. So when you walk in there, the system knows that is your intent for being there. And when you go to the counter and they say, what would you like to drink? You say, the system says, no, I'm not here to do that. I have a specific goal for this meeting, for this time. And it would spit out something like, I'm sorry, I have an appointment with Jane Doe to talk about interior design. So that would be, it has some knowledge of what your intent is, your task at this point in time.
And then the next scenario would be, so you go in there to order coffee and you run into somebody that you've had a previous conversation. So then it would recognize that person and say, well, these are topics we've talked about before.
Right.
Still, that's a very high adult cognitive load in regards to those conversations. And then we go back to that emerging communicator. So my first task is I've got Aiden with autism, and right now he's a very aggressive child in a classroom, and this is just one more tool to be thrown. So I've got to get over. So there's a lot of behavioral pieces on how to scaffold this student into it. I've done students just like that, scaffolded in, but then understand that it's got to be able to work low enough that I'm going to start working on request and then teach this child the different functions based on one-word responses. And then you're going to have to be able to scaffold it up. So you still have that service component of teaching an individual, either an adult like who has ALS, who, if you think about our baby boomers who might not be as computer savvy as these kindergartners who've gotten technology from the day they've walked into a classroom, or, you know, your graduating seniors who might be in a car accident with a TBI, you're going to approach, based on their computer background, you're going to approach each of those individuals in teaching this system totally different. So you're still going to have that learning component. And then how I approach that emerging communicator is going to be another whole domain. So, and then that emerging communicator with significant cognitive disabilities, behavior, based on their disability, what their needs are to get them onto that device. So there's a lot, it's a very simplistic view. And I want to make people understand that language is very complex. So there's some other components of teaching. So we always don't start with the tool. You hear most of your AT users really talking about, there's a process of the service. But then on the other hand, you don't want to hold somebody back who has the potential of using this technology. So it's catch-22. It's a complex
Yeah,
system.
I mean, the way I see it is the tools have to be developed to be an option once you go through your model to see which tool is the best. I like it. I have a question, probably more for you, Shannon, and other SLPs is, so if there was a way to, because just thinking about folks, because of the cognitive load, if there's a way that those responses, given this example, go into Starbucks, I want, I don't go to Starbucks, so I want a large cup of coffee. I want a cup of coffee that is the chai flavored one, and I want a coffee that is the mocha mint or whatever. Can those, I mean, like, how would it be for those responses to be kind of that coffee, coffee with chai, coffee with mint as the options, and then when you select that, it spits out the, hey there, why don't you give me a coffee with chocolate or whatever. But what I'm hearing is not actually what I'm saying. Like, is that wrong?
I think you also have to keep in mind, Scout. So say this Aiden who is so you want to make sure that it'll spit out a phrase that like that 6-year-old would say, because you don't want to overwhelm the individual who's using the device. Maybe they do have some auditory sensitivity, and if it starts just into this whole conversation, you may have some rejection because of that auditory sensitivity. So I would imagine that you wouldn't want it to you would still want, because in a typical conversation, if you are an adult and you have a child, your adult naturally scaffolds to talk to a 2-year-old. It's a motherese kind of natural strategy that if you observe even older siblings talking to a younger sibling, they naturally know how to talk to that individual, which is why it becomes complicated for AAC users, because I've watched adults dumb down to an AAC user who is actually very cognitively intact. They just don't have the mobility. So, and that's where this device could actually say, I'd like to have a real conversation with you. Please don't limit your speech for me because I'm smart. I mean, versus, a child who that's going to really kind of set them off. So there's a lot of complexity into figuring that out.
Right.
And Ken, I shared with those communication competencies, we're always looking at, when we're setting goals for individuals, you do that set framework or that HAT model where you're picking out the tool. But once you get the tool, you're looking at, do they know how to turn it on and turn it off? Do they know how to manage it? Do they know how to use the device for communication? But then also you've got that social aspect. Do they actually understand, like your emerging communicator, do they have those social skills? So you have to actually teach those social skills with the device. And that's where the algorithms for learning could really help the child because of those choices. And then you have that strategic competency where maybe I'm going into a loud environment, and so this device is not going to be actually the best tool for me because nobody's going to be able to hear it. So maybe then it can show up a screen on writing, but then you'd have to have a reader. So there's a lot of complexity involved with building or developing a proficient AAC user.
And let me, in response to what you said so far, and then Jason raised his hand.
Yeah.
There is an advantage in product development. Now to switch to product developer hat, to getting something out there and then seeing how you can enhance it to make it, to get to serve a broader community. Sometimes you don't know what something could do until you see it and people get their hands on it and do something with it. I never knew what a phone could do. In fact, I don't know why we even call this a phone, because I can't talk. My kids will not call me, but they'll text the heck out of me. So that thing took off. It does so much. I mean, I control the temperature of my house with it. that wasn't one of its initial functions. So yeah, I saw this, and it was what I say in the article is there, even if you don't have all of those boxes in the architecture, or some of them are really weak, the fact that it's basically an assembly of existing things, and that it provides value immediately is very promising for any technology. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can enhance it. It may not meet the needs of, I wouldn't want to wait on it till it met the entire needs all the way up and down the scholastic hierarchy.
Let's get to Jason's question.
I was gonna say, as a minimal viable product, I think this looks great. In terms of like getting something out there, I think all the pieces look great. I think when you put your MVP out there, I think the user set that this is gonna be the best case will present itself. That being said, I just had a couple comments on the presentation. I think all the pieces of that structure are already existing. And I think, I think what makes this such a great MVP is that, all the pieces exist, it just hasn't converged in this place yet. And so when you talk about like even the location of Starbucks, there's this tool called the Rabbit R1. And basically, I don't know if you've heard of it, but basically what it does, it takes your location. And the thought is like you push a button, say like order me, Starbucks, and it knows like, okay, I'm on my way to work. I always order the same thing. It's just going to order for you without having to know anything else, right? Or like, order me an Uber, and the thought is it's going to look at your calendar and just know, okay, you're going to this party. I'm just going to order it for you, and you're going to go because you always do a share ride. And so the pieces of it exist, and I think the only change to the presentation I would make is highlighting, not just ChatGPT that everyone knows, but like some of the other places where the technology exists. And so we're not building something new, we're just converging all of it to one point. Even like the decision-making stuff, the latest buzz is that figure one, OpenAI's figure one. And the thought behind that really is, you look at that video and it's, you were giving it a question, and it was able to formulate what the answer should be based on not just your question, but the surrounding things around it that it could see visually, right? And so it could see that there was an apple on the table. And so it formulated its response, not just because of the text prompt of the speech to text, but also visual data. And so basically you're taking that same geolocation from the Rabbit R1, the same concept of the figure one, and the same concept of ChatGPT, and all of it exists. It's just you're putting in one place. I think as in terms of presentation, to me, it would seem stronger to say, listen, I'm not creating something new. I'm just merging what's existing already.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure I caught that. Rabbit R1, like the animal, and an R1?
Yeah, like the animal. It's called Rabbit, and R like Rabbit one.
Okay. Because yeah, I mean, I've seen, I think it's OpenAI, that's the ChatGPT folks. I've seen videos about, all I do is say I'd like a haircut, and this system goes off and it has a real-time conversation with the receptionist at their haircut place and sets an appointment with you. And the receptionist never knows that they're talking to a machine. So that kind of functionality, all these add-ons to, unfortunately right now, ChatGPT, though I won't be long before Llama, which is the Facebook version, starts having all the same additional functionality. Wouldn't it be great if your AAC user had access to all that functionality too, simply because they were tied into the technology?
Yeah, and so the Rabbit is similar to what you're describing, with the exception of it connects to all your other apps. And so when you talk about like, how do I talk? Like, they'll talk as if you were me. It's pulling data from your Facebook, it's pulling data from all these other things to know this is exactly what you would do based on what you've done before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a full presentation, I think it'd be great to just bring in videos like that.
Just to bust in, we are just past the top of the hour. Not that we have to end our conversation, but I just want to respect people's time. If people do need to go, thanks for joining us. This was really, I think, really interesting. I think some good discussion. Next time though, we will, we, can be open for more discussion on other things, but I do thank you, Ken, for bringing this up. I think it's really good, food for thought for all of us, as we are all still here listening. But do we have any last questions before we take off?
I just want to mention, speaking of AI, that I've been using the Instagram AI, and it seems to be very knowledgeable with AAC and Boardmaker. So I've been using it a lot, and it's been helping me make a lot of my projects.
Cool. I think maybe even next month, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, that could be really interesting.
Well, I want to do a full-blown presentation. I don't have time for that, but
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Anybody else have any last comments before we take off? Oh, okay. And I have to go. All right, everybody. My 12:30 appointment that was has shown up early. All right. So thanks everybody, and I think we'll end it here. How about that?
Thank you.
Ken, I might reach out to you about some 3D printer stuff though.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye everybody.